After more than a decade of scrutiny and considerable opposition, Boston University is getting closer to its goal of full operation at the BioLab in the South End. Last December, the lab was cleared by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for Level 4 research involving the most dangerous pathogens. Still pending is approval by the Boston Public Health Commission. Tonight we hear from two of the opponents, an attorney with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice, Laura Maslow-Armand, and a senior science fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, Lynn Klontz. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to ask Laura to take us back to the beginnings of why we needed these labs. And this goes back to approximately September 11, 2001.
Shortly after, there was this anthrax scare where letters were mailed to important persons as well as to just ordinary civilians that contained the white powder anthrax. That prompted a release of funds in the billions that started the proliferation of labs working on these deadly pathogens. I go back to that beginning because the message that I think should have been learned, or the lesson that should have been learned from that incident, is that even a well-respected, well-known scientist at an Army lab in Fort Detrick, Maryland, could over time become homicidal. And he was apparently the one who decided to put the anthrax in those letters. Some of his colleagues noticed that he was beginning to be a little bizarre, but nobody stopped him and nobody restricted his access. So that's the danger that we consider practically the main one of in these laboratories, is that there's no way to predict or to prevent a lab technician from becoming homicidal, suicidal, and that is a constant danger that BU has never addressed.
But plus, this lab also has some solid supporters too, and what we keep hearing from them is that this is not a lab to make life dangerous. We're here to protect people from things like Ebola and Zika. So what's the problem?
I have a few things to say about that. In a crowded urban environment, if a lab worker gets infected and goes home at night because he or she doesn't know it's been infected, that person could spread the disease to somebody else. My main worry is crowded public transportation. Subways and buses, I'm sure you've been on them in rush hour. They're very crowded. If strangers get infected, they'd be very difficult to trace for quarantine because they're strangers. And the only pathogens that require BSL-4 containment are a small number of pathogens.
BSL-4, that's the level 4.
Yeah, level 4. That's the highest level of biocontainment. Suited up people, outside air, all sorts of things. The only organisms that require BSL-4 are Ebola, Marburg, Lassa, and a number of similar kinds of viruses. Not one of those is a public health threat in Boston, nor are they public health threats anywhere in the United States. So what's going on in that lab really isn't of any direct interest to the Boston Public Health Commission. They have their own set of organisms. They're especially worried about sexually transmitted diseases and other things. Our argument is the BSL-4, they ought to just open the doors, not operate it as a BSL-4, operate it as a BSL-2, and work on pathogens which are important to Boston and the United States.
Laura Maslow-Armand, Chris, you're also thinking about the regulators. The city would have a lot of regulatory power, and you've got people in Washington too, right?
Right, but there's very little regulatory oversight. The main oversight could come from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and as has just been stated in a recent congressional hearing, they are not able to police their own lab. There are constant safety lapses. It's called a culture of laxity. Congress has said there's chronic negligence in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Boston University is not as experienced. That's an academic institution as well, as opposed to, let's say, Fort Detrick. There's human error. The error is generally to send out a virulent strain of a virus when you think it's deactivated. And that, from the CDC, led to the sending out of avian bird flu to the U.S. Agricultural Laboratory in Kansas, and had it not been detected, that's the poultry industry that would have been wiped out. So those kinds of errors in the CDC ought to tell us that it's too dangerous. for Boston University to have this laboratory in downtown Boston.
Lynn Klotz, we have other universities that run labs. BU has been running labs, I'm sure, for quite a long time. What do we know about this? I mean, are there any other places around the country where a level 4 lab has been a problem?
I think just the CDC. There have been some escapes from there, mainly from failure to deactivate. Working in BSL-4 and even BSL-3 is very difficult because you're all suited up, the work goes very slowly. So what researchers want to do is deactivate a virus, meaning make it non-infectious, so they can work in BSL-2. And that's how most escapes occur, because they fail to deactivate properly. So they send live virus from BSL-4, BSL-3 down into BSL-2.
Now, when I've heard from, I think, officials from BU in the city that some of these viruses, they are pretty deadly, but given the conditions at a given place in time, they might not be in a form in which they're easily spread, too.
I don't know if I believe that. Ebola has something called a reproductive number of 2, meaning any one person infected can infect 2 other people. And so therefore, if it gets out, I think we could stop a major epidemic from Ebola in Boston, but a lot of people could get killed, and that would have a lot of economic and psychological consequences in the local area.
Laura Muscle-Almond, what about the argument that these labs are needed because, as I say, BU has been emphasizing we're here to do research on all of these new pathogens, some of which we haven't heard about yet because we don't know about them, but they're going to be coming.
Chris, I would answer, do we need 15 of such labs in the United States today?
Or 40 worldwide, or over 40 worldwide. There are lots of these labs.
And I would just rely on the quote from the former head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He's not part of our coalition. He is a doctor, Dr. Thomas Frieden. He said, the only way to reduce the risk is to reduce the number of laboratories working on these pathogens, reduce the number of persons working in the lab, and reduce the number of pathogens. That has been repeated as his final remarks now as he leaves office. We are in the process of multiplying these laboratories. I would also quote an NIH official who went out to Hamilton, Montana, where there was a level 3 lab in the process of becoming level 4. He said, we've chosen a sparsely populated area because, should there be an escape, there will not be a public health disaster. You can't easily evacuate downtown Boston, where the lab is located near Roxbury and the South End. We, of course, in our work on these 14 years, emphasize that this is an issue of environmental justice. There was no compliance of Boston University with any of the principles of the executive order of President Clinton, Executive Order 12898 in 1994, that urges anyone putting in a facility like the laboratory to consult the affected community, to dialogue, to see how you might mitigate the risks. That was never done. There's been no consultation or consent.
We're talking with Laura Maslow-Armand from Laura's Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice and Lynn Klotz from the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. Lynn, I'm sure you've heard the argument before that instead of putting something like this out in the boondocks, it's better to have it in the city because you have this critical mass of skilled first responders. You have all these other universities and colleges with scientific experts around here. So don't you have to put it in the city?
No, I would say you don't lose any of that. What we suggest is, because the Fort Detrick labs, for example, are community labs, meaning people from outside, once they're cleared, which is a major process, but once they're cleared, they can work in these laboratories. So our suggestion is that they do their BSL-4 experiments in Fort Detrick or perhaps Galveston, some of the other labs where they also could get permission. Their home base is still here. So they're professors at the Needle and Boston University. They'll have all the interactions that they want with the local community, but yet their most dangerous experiments would be done in Fort Detrick or one of the other places.
Laura Maslow-Armand, talk about economic justice, because what we've been hearing from supporters of this lab is that this is critical for the biotech sector and all these maybe potential STEM job opportunities for young people.
Can I answer that?
Why don't you
Sure.
answer that?
I'm actually an executive in the biotechnology industry. I'm right now vice president of biotechnology and biobusiness. I have been a vice president at Biotechnic International of Development. I teach a course on the business of biotechnology, drug discovery and development. And I would argue that there's no need for a BSL-4 lab to do that. In Cambridge, there's no BSL-4 labs allowed. In Northern California, one of the other very big biotech sectors, no BSL-4 labs. Cambridge is the hub in the United States and probably in the world for biotechnology research and medical research. So,
Laura Massaman, of course, the other part of the environmental justice narrative here is that you have people within a closer radius to this lab who feel that, well, this is more unfair.
That's right. That's right. Chris, I'd like to mention something that's coming up because, as you know when we talked about having this program, the CDC has already issued a permit, and there's one more permit to go, and it's from the Boston Public Health Commission, who is responsible for overseeing the public health of the citizens of Boston. We believe that there are serious conflicts of interest in the reviewing of the permit by the commissioners on the Board of Health of the Boston Public Health Commission, and now the executive director. If you say 7 commissioners plus an executive director, that's 8. You need to have a vote of 4 on the permit. There are conflicts of interest because they are linked to Boston University, Boston School of Medicine, and Boston Medical Center, close links among all but 3 of them. 3 wouldn't be enough to get an affirmative vote. These conflicts of interest are laid out under Massachusetts Chapter 268A. This is something that Mayor Walsh, we hope he's aware of. They had to get some kind of waiver to be able to be reviewing the lab, reviewing the permit, but apparently they've been reviewing it for some time now. This is a serious issue.
I will certainly check those affiliations, but one thing that does cross my mind is that, this is something that has a red exclamation point next to it. Tom Menino knew about that. I'm sure Marty Walsh does. I mean, do you think that they're moving the way they want to move just because of those 4 people on the board who might have a BU connection?
Maybe they're not considering this issue. Maybe it's been under the radar. Nobody has called it to their attention. We wrote to Mayor Walsh and sent him a letter 2 years ago with almost 100 signatories saying, don't allow the level 4 laboratory. We haven't heard back.
Of course, I also want to ask you about some of the bright lines I've heard about over the years about things that cannot be done at this lab with either weaponized research or research that might involve some kind of genetic alterations.
The weaponized is internationally illegal under the Biological Weapons Convention, so they can't do that.
And what about anything that might involve some kind of genetic alterations? Is that pretty much
There's recombinant
off the table?
DNA is not allowed in that lab in Boston. And that's something that was passed long before the discussion of the BSL-4.
Unless they get a permit from the Boston Public Health Commission. We don't think the Boston Public Health Commission has the staff, the resources, or the expertise to oversee this kind of research in that laboratory.
Lynn, I also want to ask you about one problem that did occur in the building, and some people say it shows that there could be problems in the future, and other people say this problem was handled so efficiently and swiftly that it ought to be reassuring.
Well, it's good they did in that case, but it also was a laboratory in which there was no pathogens and no work going on at the time. So it's hard to say what would happen in an active laboratory. And this Boston University, they've been arguing for a long time that the BSL-4 lab is completely safe, and I think the way they describe it as a vault inside a vault, something like that.
I've heard that, yes.
And, but they're missing the point. The point is not mechanical safety, as far as I'm concerned. It's lab error, human error, failure to deactivate. Somebody gets infected and they don't know it, and they will go out into the community. So, in fact, all the things that we know about and that escapes of the CDC, they've all been human error, basically. So,
Haste and sloppiness.
Yeah.
Basically, it's haste and the competitive atmosphere. When we proposed to BU, what would you do about this? The answer from Boston University in public has been, we have a buddy system. We will have one laboratory worker monitoring another. That cannot be the solution. It's not possible even to know what your colleague is doing, and you're not going to spend your time watching him, you're more likely to prick yourself with some dangerous pathogen. So
Yeah,
that's
I
not a good
also
answer.
think the buddy system doesn't work because it utilizes two people to do one person's work, and I have a feeling that it just won't last for a while.
Thank you both very much. Lynn Klutz and Laura Maslow
Thank you.
Armand.